And continuing with the 11th chapter of Dragons in the Waters, which is called The Lake of Dragons. Hurtado and Vermeer sat on the boat deck. "You saw the portrait yourself?" Hurtado asked the Dutchman. "Yes, it is a fine portrait and an excellent likeness of Bolivar in his prime." "And on the back? For my son, born of Umara." Actually, one had to know that was what was there. It looked to me as though someone had tried to sand and chip the words away. The wood on which the portrait is painted is thin in places, and some of the letters were cut so deep that it would have been impossible to eradicate them without cutting into the portrait. Only the letters U-M-R are still clear. "How did the old lady explain them?" "She said that until she had read the journals and letters that there was no reason to be curious. Unless one has heard of the Cristianos at Dragon Lake, U-M-A-R is only a meaningless jumble of letters. She said that she had thought it might be the mark of the artist." Hurtado's jaw seemed to darken. "I need to talk to her." Vermeer nodded sympathetically. "She could not have made the trip back." "Are you positive?" "I myself felt her pulse. It was weak and far too rapid, and very uneven. Her zeal to learn the truth was greater than her strength, and she is half ill with anxiety over the boy. With cause, I have learned that Forsyth Farr died 2 years ago in Salt Lake City, Utah. The passport and all else the impostor gave the old woman are excellent forgeries, so it is conceivable that the murderer murdered the wrong man." Vermeer rubbed his nose. "The plot thickens. The murderer may not have known that Farr was an assumed name, and it may have been a Farr he was after. The ancient Cristano legend against all Farrs. I am a Latin, Vermeer, and I take such things more seriously than you do. Hate does not die easily around here, nor the passion to bring past crimes to judgment. Don't forget that there are at this moment Israelis in Argentina tracking down Nazis. Yes, that too is a long time to hold hate. Hate dies less easily than love. How did the Cristianos explain the portrait in their village?" Vermeer said, "I would like a beer. How about you?" Hurtado rose and went to the call bell. When he sat down again, Vermeer said, "Umars and I said that they do not know how the portrait came to them." "Oh?" "It was brought to the village, it seems, by a fisherman who has Cristano blood. He could not or would not tell them how he got it." "Could not?" "According to Umar Zanai, he was in a state of terror. All he wanted was to unload the portrait." Both men were silent as they heard steps. Jan climbed up from the promenade deck. "You rang, sir?" "Yes, Jan. 2 beers, please." Vermeer's smile sprang back to his face. He looked after Jan running down the steps and asked, "What are you going to do about him?" "Jan, tonight? Nothing." Vermeer said, "It is Jan who took me for my first visit to the Cristianos. Otherwise, I shouldn't have been welcomed. I feel that I am betraying my friend. If he is innocent, he has nothing to fear. If he is involved in smuggling—" Vermeer cut him off. "No, I can't think of Jan as belonging to the world of smugglers, even the more innocent kind. Is there an innocent kind? The early smuggling, tea, sugar, spices. I cannot think of such goods in the same category as drugs and chemicals." "What about the art racket?" "Art what? Racket, an American idiom. It's bad, but it's not quite as contemptible as drugs, as antibiotics and steroids cut with poisons, as chemicals misused to destroy life for the sake of greed. Smuggling is far worse today than it used to be. It is a sin to steal a pin." "What?" "An English idiom. Smuggling is smuggling. One step leads to another. Jan has not stolen a pin." How well do you know him?" Hurtado asked calmly. "I thought I knew him extremely well, but of course I see him only when the Orion puts in its port of dragons and when he takes me out to Dragon Lake, but I have always sensed in him a deep innocence. Perhaps that very innocence makes it possible for someone less innocent to use him for less than innocent purposes." "Gutierrez?" Vermeer suggested hopefully. "Have you got anything on him?" "Not yet. Remember, I'm only a consul, and I don't have an army of policemen and detectives and Secret Service people at my beck and call. You might be interested to know that he has flown the coop. Has what? An English idiom. I sent for him this morning and was told that he had gone to visit his mother, who is very ill. Marvelous convenient how mothers can get ill when the heat is on, another English idiom. Where is this alleged mother? In one of the small villages deep in the jungle. He preempted a helicopter. No telephone, of course. He cannot be reached. Vermeer pulled up one of his knee socks and straightened the garter. He has a reputation for knowing the jungle well, including places that can be reached only by canoe or copter. I prefer to think of oily little Gutierrez involved in dark doings rather than one of my compatriots. Jan doesn't have a Dutch passport. No, he wouldn't do anything to hurt Van Leyden. Or Jan does have a Dutch passport. No, he wouldn't do anything to hurt Van Leyden. It would look bad for Van Leyden if someone on his ship is dealing in narcotics on the side. Narcotics is only a small part of it. Chemicals, including mercury. Mercury, yes, Hurtado said. You know, Vermeer, if Dr. O'Keefe had been murdered, I could have understood it better than fair. Because it is an ill-kept secret that he has been brought to Venezuela to investigate Dragon Lake. There have been several cases of mercury poisoning among the people who live near one of the chemical plants. The oil wells are the obvious pollutant, but not necessarily the most dangerous one. Industrial effluents containing mercury absorbed by the fish, which are then eaten by the people of the barrio. Yes, I've heard. Uldi said something. It's one of the nastier forms of poisoning, with neurological damage and intense pain. Hurtado looked grim. I'd better have O'Keefe watch then. Does he have any idea he may be in danger? He's no fool. Vermeer suddenly looked as grim as the policeman. Jan appeared with a tray, 2 bottles of beer and 2 glasses. He set it down on the bench between the 2 men. Instead of leaving immediately, he asked anxiously, Is there any news of Simon? Not yet. Not yet, Hurtado said. Miss Leonis sat on the veranda of the Umara's house. The Umara had been placed on a low couch, and Umara's and I sat on the floor, as did Ualde. A large round tray was set on a low table between them. It contained a graceful bowl of fruit and a corresponding pitcher of cool and delicious drink, which seemed to have been made from a combination of fruits and herbs. Umars and I passed a glass of the pale green beverage to Miss Leonis. This is a restorative. It may give you strength and calm your heart. It will give you strength and calm your heart. She sipped it appreciatively. Thank you. I had not realized quite how tired I am from my journeyings. The Umara spoke in her strange ancient voice, and Uli translated, Your journey through time as well as space. Miss Leonis sipped again. Yes, I am learning that I share in your memory. It is our loss in my world that we no longer value the memory of our people. Umars and I replied, Those who do not share in the memory are only a part of themselves. It is good that you have come to fulfill what has been lost. Miss Leonis sighed, her heart pained within her. As she sipped the cool liquid, the gray look receded from her face, but her eyes were dark with pain. Uldi said, The fair is safe, the Umar promises. Miss Leonis bowed. I'm grateful, and grateful too for your kindness and hospitality. I understand from Mynheer Vermeer that you do not encourage strangers. Umars and I replied, We have a work to do. It is easily misunderstood. If the wrong people come with modern investigations, we might be forbidden to do our work. Or they might want us to make it bigger, and that would destroy it, and then... He pointed toward the great carving. She would no longer smile. Miss Leonis set down her empty glass. Her breathing was no longer angry, but it still rasped. It is very kind of you to keep me here tonight. The trip back to Port of Dragons would have been too much for me, and I'm not sure when or if I will be able to leave. Umars and I smiled. It is our honor to have you with us for as long as need be. We knew that you were coming to Venezuela even before the Dutchman made the arrangements for you today, so we have been expecting you. How did you know? Jan, the steward on the Orion. I have in my memory a picture of his Cristano grandmother when she was young and beautiful, and in love with the big blonde youth from Holland. Jan has become dear to my heart, and his knowledge of the Quistano part of his heritage. With his love of the Quistano part of his heritage, he knows our way of sending messages. A whistle here, the beat of a drum there, another whistle, and it is quicker than your modern machines. How did man here Vermeer make the arrangements for today? Thus, through Jan feared the trip would be overtax you, so even before you arrived, we had made preparations for you to stay. A twinkle came into the old man's eye, and he spoke swiftly to Uldi, the liquid syllables bubbling like a brook in early spring. Uldi said, "Grandfather says that you will be more comfortable here than at the So New Mother Hotel. Always at night a breeze comes over the lake from the forest, and the forest lends us the coolness of its shadows, and the mountain gives us the strength of its peace, and," he gestured toward the statue, "she gives us her blessing." "Your Lady of the Lake," Miss Leonis said. Uldi translated, "Not of the lake only. She speaks to us not merely of the waters, but of the wind and the rain and the mountain and the stars and the power behind them all." Miss Leonis looked out over the peaceful scene. I too trust the same power." The Amara, who seemed to have fallen asleep, spoke. Uldi listened carefully. "She says that this power is the power which has all memory. Even her memory is as nothing compared to the memory of the power behind the stars." Miss Leonis said, "To be part of the memory of this power is for life to have meaning, no matter what happens." She had based her life on this faith. She did not begin to doubt it now. Simon and Canon Tallis sat by their fire. "But you don't think we're going to have to stay here more than one more night, do you?" "No, Simon. If nobody has found us by tomorrow morning, I think we will have to start heading toward the sea. We've run out of edible berries within moderate radius of our campsite. But you did nobly indeed to get us these coconuts. I was beginning to feel dehydrated." "So was I," Simon said. "I don't think anything has ever tasted so good." He looked at his scratched hands. His thighs were scraped from the descent from the high tree. Why did the coconuts have to be at the very top? But they still had 2 coconuts for morning. Tallis said, "I've been given too many warnings about the water in South American streams and rivers to risk drinking, no matter how clean that nearby stream may look. There are tiny organisms which bite and lay eggs in one's bloodstream, for instance, which cause a slow death. It's not worth the risk." The dark seemed to increase around them. Simon broke the silence to ask, "When Quentin Fair came to see about his mother's inheritance in North Florida and Georgia and South Carolina, what was it like?" "It was probably more like this than like the country you grew up in. Our ancestors braved considerable danger without making any fuss about it." "We're not making much fuss, are we?" "You're not," Canon Tallis said. "I'm doing a good deal of grunting and groaning over my physical exertions. I'm woefully out of condition. Now, Simon, you take the first watch tonight, and I'll sleep for an hour or so. Don't hesitate to wake me if you see or hear anything." "Are you ever frightened?" Simon asked the canon. Simon asked as the canon arranged himself on his bed of moss and fern. He was a large man, a little too heavy. His bald head caught and reflected the light from the fire. "Frequently." "Are you frightened now?" "No, there doesn't seem to be any particular reason to be frightened, but I am tired from our labors. Good night, Simon." "Good night, Uncle Father." Simon noticed that the priest kept his wooden spear under his hand. The night seemed to be even more alive with sound than had the night before, or perhaps his ears were more attuned to it. He thought he could even hear insects moving along the rough bark of the tree trunks. The birds settled down for the night, but more noisily than the cannon. They seemed to be passing along messages to each other. He was sure he recognized the chittering of monkeys, although they had seen none. The day had been brightened by the wings of birds, but the only animals they had seen were a kind of squirrel and many lizards of varying sizes. Simon stiffened and put his hand on his own spears. He saw 2 eyes reflecting reflecting their firelight. He threw another piece of wood on the fire, but he couldn't use too much wood or it wouldn't last until morning. The eyes retreated. Simon looked over at the cannon, whose body was relaxed. The palm leaf hat was over his eyes. He was breathing quietly, not snoring, but the relaxed breathing of sleep. The boy turned, and the eyes were there again, this time closer. He took a stick and stirred the fire, but the eyes did not go away. He took a small stone and threw it as hard as he could. Whatever the beast was, it moved heavily with a crackling of twigs, but retreated only a few inches. The eyes looked small and ugly in the firelight, but Simon did not think the animal was as small as the eyes would indicate. He tried staring it down. The eyes blinked but opened again. There was a small snap of twigs, and the beast moved forward until Simon could see what it was. A wild boar. With trembling hands, he grabbed the spear, shouting, "Go away!" Canon Talus awoke. Canon Talus was awakened on his feet in seconds, holding his spear lightly in his right hand. There was a horrendous noise of grunting, screeching. Screeching beast, and the cannon shouted, "Out of the way!" Simon stepped back, spear in hand, ready to move in, but keeping out of the way of the cannon's feet. The snarling of the animal was the most repellent sound he had ever heard, but then the snarling changed to a scream, which was worse. The cannon, too, was breathing heavily with effort. His spear was deep in the boar, but the animal thrashed wildly, and with enormous strength, and Simon could see that the cannon was beginning to tire. Suddenly the boar turned so that Simon, putting all his weight into his action, could thrust his own spear into the leathery hide. But the raging beast was stronger than both of them, although it no longer wanted to attack. With two spears buried deep in its flesh, it burst away from them and crashed into the forest. "Will it come back?" Simon panted. Canon Talus was taking great gulps of the dark, humid air. "I doubt it. I think we wounded it pretty badly. That's good work, Simon. I'm not sure I could have kept up much longer. Are you all right?" "Yes, sir." "You're a brave boy." Canon Talus stretched one leg toward the fire. The dark cloth of the trousers was ripped from thigh to ankle, and blood dripped to the ground. "Oh, sir, he hurt you." The canon examined an ugly gash along his calf. "It's only a flesh wound, but I ought to wash it." "Not the stream," Simon said. "It would be as dangerous as drinking it." Bright lad. You're quite right, but I'll let it bleed a bit, and the blood itself will clean it. See if you can gather me some clean ferns, and I'll stanch the blood with them." When the wound was covered with fresh green and the bleeding stopped, the canon said, "I doubt if either of us will do much sleeping for the rest of the night. Let's go over once more everything we know about the theft of the portrait and the murder of the fair. Each time you tell me, you remember something new, and we'll pause there."